Lieutenant Henry Carter destroyed an entire operation with 5 words spoken in the wrong bar. Operation Market Garden, September 1944. 3 days before the largest airborne assault in history, he was celebrating his promotion in a Dutch pub packed with civilians. Someone asked what he was doing there, and instead of remaining silent, instead of making up some story, he smiled proudly and said, "In 3 days, you will see the skies full of Allied parachutes." 48 hours later, 200 German soldiers were positioned exactly in the planned landing zones. 87 men died before touching the ground. Today you are not betraying military operations, but your words betray your dreams just the same. On that devastating night, as he carried the bodies of men who died because he couldn't keep his mouth shut, Lieutenant Carter made a brutal vow. He would never again speak about what he planned to do. He would just do it. He spent the next 18 months of the war in absolute silence, beginning each mission small without announcements, without expectations, building discreet victories that no one saw until they were complete. And this silent method transformed an arrogant officer into the most effective strategist in his battalion. You are about to discover why starting small and ending big in silence is more powerful than starting big and failing publicly. You will understand what happens when you stop announcing plans and start executing them discreetly. And you will learn why your words are the most treacherous enemy of your own dreams. I found my grandfather's letters inside a faded military suitcase at the back of the garage 5 weeks after the funeral. He never spoke about Operation Market Garden. He never mentioned the men who died in those Dutch camps in September 1944. He never explained why he spent hours in absolute silence, just staring out the window, as if carrying conversations he should never have had. When I began to read those yellowed pages, stained with time and guilt, I understood why. Lieutenant Henry Carter didn't just witness a tragedy, he was directly responsible for it. And the way he carries that guilt in the words written over decades is devastating. September 1944. The Netherlands was partially occupied by the Germans, but some cities in the south had already been liberated by Allied forces. Lieutenant Henry Carter was 26 years old, had just received a promotion, and felt invincible in the most dangerous way possible, believing that his personal worth was directly connected to how much people knew about his accomplishments. He was the kind of man who needed to be recognized, admired, validated externally. And on that fateful night in an Eindhoven pub, surrounded by Dutch civilians celebrating the recent liberation, someone asked him what he was doing there. It was an innocent question. He could have lied. He could have invented any generic story. He could have simply remained silent. But instead, inflated with pride at his promotion and the importance of the secret mission he knew about, he smiled and said, "In 3 days, you'll see the skies full of Allied parachutes." 5 words, 9 seconds of vanity, and 87 deaths. Because in that crowded pub, among genuine Dutch civilians, there were 3 disguised German informants doing exactly their job, listening to the careless conversations of drunken and proud soldiers. 48 hours later, 200 German soldiers were strategically positioned in the landing zones planned for the airborne operation, and when the Allied parachutes began to descend from the Dutch skies like white snow against the blue afternoon, they were met with machine guns that already knew exactly where to aim. My grandfather wrote that he could hear the screams of the men dying in the air before touching the ground, executed while floating helplessly strapped to their parachutes. Today, you do the same thing. You're not betraying military operations, but you're betraying your own dreams every time you announce grand plans before executing them. Every time you post on social media about the project you're going to start, the diet you're going to follow, the company you're going to open, the life you're going to build, you're giving ammunition to invisible enemies, external pressure, public expectation, the judgment of others. And when you inevitably fail because you started too big, too fast, too loudly, those same observers you tried to impress become silent witnesses to your failure. If you're reading this now, don't abandon Lieutenant Carter in that bloody Dutch field. Leave a like. He needs you to understand the deadly price of talking too much and the silent power of starting small. That like is your confirmation that you're ready to learn why strategic silence kills fewer dreams than premature propaganda. During the 72 hours between the pub conversation and the start of the operation, Lieutenant Carter lived in a silent psychological hell. He wasn't absolutely certain there were German informants in that bar. He had no concrete proof that his words had been overheard by the wrong people. But he had something far worse than certainty, the devastating possibility that his pathetic need to impress strangers could cost the lives of men who trusted him. And that possibility gnawed at every thought, every breath, every moment of waiting before the attack began. My grandfather wrote that he tried to warn his superiors, but he had no solid evidence to present, just a hunch based on wounded pride and growing shame. And in military operations of this magnitude, the hunches of newly promoted lieutenants don't change plans drawn up by generals over months. So he remained silent for the first time in his life, not by strategic choice, but out of paralyzing cowardice. He was afraid to admit that he might have compromised the entire operation. He was afraid of being held accountable. He was afraid to face the consequences of 5 seconds of stupid vanity. As the first paratroopers began to fall under concentrated and lethal German fire, Carter was watching from an elevated position 3 kilometers away. He saw men being hit in mid-air, bodies still strapped into their parachutes falling like broken mannequins. He saw soldiers who managed to touch the ground being massacred before they could free themselves from their equipment. He saw 87 deaths, happening in real time while knowing, with a certainty that burned more than any bullet, that it was his fault. Not the German command's, not bad luck, his. 5 words spoken to impress people he would never see again in his life. The subsequent military investigation concluded that the operation had been compromised by an intelligence failure, failing to correctly identify the number of German troops in the region. Carter was never formally charged. He never faced a court-martial. Technically, he was free of official guilt, but he knew the truth, and that truth destroyed him in a way that no external punishment could match. He had learned the hard way that words are not just sounds that dissipate in the air. They are unfulfilled commitments, created expectations, exposed vulnerabilities. And every unnecessary word spoken is ammunition voluntarily delivered to enemies you don't even know exist. On the night after the disastrous operation, while the medical camp treated the wounded and prepared the bodies of the dead, Lieutenant Henry Carter picked up a clean military notebook and wrote in trembling handwriting a statement that would completely change how he operated for the next 18 months of the war. I will never again talk about what I intend to do. I will just do it. I will start so small that no one will notice. I will end so big that no one will forget. And between the beginning and the end, there will be only silence and action. This wasn't superficial motivation or cheap self-help. It was a psychological survival protocol born from devastating guilt. Carter had understood something fundamental about human nature. When you announce grand plans, you're asking the universe for 3 terrible things. First, you're creating external expectations that will demand results from you before you even begin. Second, you're wasting the emotional energy of achievement before you've accomplished anything real. Third, you're exposing vulnerabilities to enemies you don't even know exist. People who will root for your failure, who will silently sabotage you, who will use your own words as weapons against you. He began applying the method immediately. When he received the mission to reconnoiter a German bridge for possible sabotage, he told no one except his direct command. He didn't mention it at dinners. He didn't discuss it with other officers. He didn't write letters home explaining the importance of the operation. He simply took 3 trusted soldiers, planned in absolute silence for 48 hours, executed the mission on a moonless night, and returned with precise tactical intelligence that saved 2 entire companies from an ambush. No one knew about the mission until it was complete. No one had expectations. No one demanded results in advance, and no one had the opportunity to sabotage. My grandfather discovered that starting small had a devastating psychological power. It eliminated the paralyzing pressure of high expectations. When you start quietly, without announcements, without an audience, you can fail without public humiliation. You can adjust strategies without admitting failure. You can test approaches without compromising your reputation. And each small, silent victory built real confidence. Not the false confidence that comes from likes and external validation, but the brutal confidence that comes from knowing you are capable of performing, even when no one is watching, applauding, or demanding anything. For the next 6 months, something extraordinary happened to Lieutenant Carter. He became invisible in a way that exponentially increased his effectiveness. While other officers boasted of small victories, exaggerated modest achievements, inflated numbers to impress superiors, Carter simply executed mission after mission in absolute silence. He didn't talk about what he planned, he didn't comment on what he was doing, and he only mentioned results when they were impossible to ignore, when enemy bodies were counted, when bridges were blown up, when supply routes were cut. My grandfather noted in his diary that strategic silence created a triple psychological advantage. First, it eliminated the need to manage external expectations, freeing up mental energy to focus solely on execution. Second, it protected operations from unintentional sabotage, because people unaware of a plan cannot compromise it through careless conversations. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it transformed each outcome into a positive surprise rather than a fulfilled expectation. When you announce you're going to do something incredible and you succeed, people think you've only done what was expected. When you announce nothing and deliver something extraordinary, people are genuinely impressed. The other officers began to notice that Carter had changed radically. The arrogant, talkative man who needed constant validation had disappeared. In his place emerged someone quiet, observant, lethally efficient. He spoke only when absolutely necessary. His words were precise, direct, without embellishment, and his actions consistently exceeded his promises because he simply didn't make promises. He delivered. Colonel Robert Hayes, the battalion commander, called Carter for a private conversation in February 1945. He said something that my grandfather transcribed word for word. "Lieutenant, you have become the most dangerous type of soldier. Silent, competent, and unpredictable. Your enemies don't know what you're planning. Your allies don't know what to expect, and you deliver results that no one saw coming. That's real leadership. It's not charisma, it's not eloquence, it's silent execution that speaks louder than 1,000 speeches." If you're beginning to understand that your words betray your dreams more than your enemies ever could, don't let Lieutenant Carter fight this battle alone. Subscribe to this channel now. He has proven through 18 months of silent warfare that starting small and ending big without announcements and without an audience is infinitely more powerful than starting loud and ending in shame. This subscription confirms that you are ready to trade propaganda for execution. You do the exact opposite of what Lieutenant Carter learned. You announce on Monday that you're going on a diet. You post on Instagram about the new project. You tell everyone in the office about the business you're going to open. And in the process of announcing, your idiotic mind confuses announcement with achievement. The brain releases dopamine when you receive likes, positive comments, external validation, and this premature chemical reward steals the real motivation you would need to perform the hard, quiet work that really matters. Neuroscience calls this reward substitution. When you talk about your plans and receive social validation, the brain registers a small victory. And since it has already received the emotional reward, it loses a significant part of the urgency to turn that plan into reality. This is why people who announce big changes rarely complete them. They have already spent their emotional energy on advertising. They have already satisfied their need for recognition through empty words. And when the time comes to do the brutal, lonely, and invisible work that transforms plans into results, there is no mental fuel left. My grandfather documented 12 specific military operations where absolute silence was the difference between success and massacre. In one of them, he planned for 3 weeks the infiltration of a fortified German position. He told no one except the 5 soldiers directly involved. He didn't mention it in general briefings. He didn't write preliminary reports. He executed the mission in the middle of a dense fog at dawn, neutralized 17 enemy soldiers without firing a single shot, and returned with maps of artillery positions that saved hundreds of lives in the subsequent offensive. No one knew the mission existed until it was complete. Compare this to the original Operation Market Garden, where so many officers and soldiers talked so much about the imminence of a major airborne attack that even Dutch civilians knew something monumental was about to happen. The difference wasn't in tactical competence or the courage of the men. It was in the discipline of silence. One operation was executed by silent ghosts. The other was heralded by men who confused personal importance with operational effectiveness. And that confusion cost thousands of lives. Carter wrote a phrase that should be tattooed on the mind of every man who wants to build something real. Premature advertising is unintentional betrayal. Every unnecessary word about future plans is a vulnerability created, an expectation manufactured, energy wasted. Silent men build. Noisy men only announce constructions that never happen. March 1945. Lieutenant Carter received the most important mission of his career, to coordinate the capture of a German munitions factory that supplied 3 enemy divisions in the region. It was a massive operation involving 200 soldiers, artillery support, and perfect timing. Any normal commander would have started big, elaborate briefings, detailed maps on illuminated tables, motivational speeches to hundreds of men. Carter did the opposite. He began with 3 soldiers in a closed room, hand-drawing a rudimentary map on ordinary paper. He divided the gigantic operation into 17 sequential micro-missions, each so small that it seemed irrelevant in isolation. The first micro-mission was simply to observe the factory for 48 hours and note the movement patterns of the guards. No heroism, no unnecessary risk, just silent observation. The second was to map the night patrol routes. The third was to identify weak points in the perimeter fence, and so on, building detailed knowledge through tiny actions that no one noticed because they were too small to seem threatening. My grandfather wrote something that reveals brutal tactical genius. Enemies prepare for large, obvious attacks. They don't prepare for hundreds of microscopic actions that individually seem harmless, but collectively destroy your defensive capabilities. For 3 weeks, Carter executed these micro-missions in total silence. Each small achievement was privately documented, internally analyzed, never publicly celebrated. And when the moment for the coordinated attack finally arrived, he had such detailed information about that factory that it seemed as if he had worked there for years. The operation lasted 43 minutes. 0 Allied casualties. 117 Germans captured without firing more than 20 shots. And the factory completely neutralized. When his superiors asked how on earth he had achieved such absolute success, Carter simply handed over a 300-page dossier documenting every micro-mission, every observation, every detail, accumulated during weeks of silent work. He hadn't started big and hoped for luck. He had started invisibly and ended inevitably. The lesson is devastating in its simplicity. When you start too small to fail publicly, you can experiment, adjust, and learn without the paralyzing weight of external expectations. And each silent micro-victory builds real competence that eventually transforms into achievements that no one can ignore. Not because you announced it, because you executed it. Don't let Lieutenant Carter build this silent operation alone. Leave your like now. He transformed 3 weeks of invisible micro-actions into 43 minutes of absolute victory. This like confirms you understood. True greatness doesn't begin with loud announcements. It begins with actions too small to be noticed until they become impossible to ignore. You're not in Holland in 1944. You're not planning military operations against German munitions factories. But you are fighting the very same war that transformed Lieutenant Carter from an arrogant, talkative officer into a silent, lethal strategist. The only difference is that your enemies don't wear German uniforms. They are the people who pretend to root for you, but secretly hope for your failure. They are the social media algorithms that reward empty ads with temporary validation. They are the mental patterns that confuse talking about doing with actually doing. Every time you post on social media about a project you're about to start, you're repeating Carter's fatal mistake in that Dutch pub. You're giving away strategic information to observers you don't even know, creating expectations that will demand results before you've built anything real, and wasting emotional energy on advertising when you should be investing it in execution. And when you inevitably fail to deliver on what you promised because you started too big and too loud, Those same people who liked your post become silent witnesses to your failure. My grandfather applied the method of strategic silence not only in the war, but throughout the following 63 years of civilian life. When he decided to open a construction company in 1947, he didn't tell anyone. He bought used tools, took the first small job that came along, executed it with silent perfection, used that satisfied client to get the next one, and built a reputation through real deliveries, not noisy promises. 5 years later, he had one of the most respected construction companies in the region. And when people asked how he had grown so fast, he simply said, "I started so small that nobody noticed. I finished so big that nobody forgot." The brutal truth is that you live in an era where advertising is rewarded more than execution, where ads generate more validation than results, where influencers sell dreams they've never realized and are celebrated for it. And in this toxic environment, the power of strategic silence becomes even more devastating. When everyone is shouting about what they're going to do, you have the opportunity to become invisible, execute silently, and emerge with real achievements that make all that noise seem pathetic in comparison. April 1945. The war was ending, Germany was collapsing, and Lieutenant Henry Carter had become a silent legend among the soldiers who served with him. But something interesting happened that reveals a devastating psychological truth. The more effective he became through silence, the less official recognition he received. Other officers who spoke more, who promoted themselves better, who knew how to sell their achievements even when they were mediocre, received medals, promotions, mentions in reports. Carter received only more difficult missions. He could have become bitter. He could have reverted to old patterns of seeking external validation through publicity. But he had learned something far more valuable than recognition. He had learned that men who need an audience to perform are slaves to the opinions of others, while men who perform in silence are free to build without the paralyzing prison of external expectations. My grandfather wrote, "I discovered that premature recognition is poison disguised as reward. It makes you dependent on approval to continue. It turns you into a performer who needs constant applause. And when the applause stops, you stop too." Modern science confirms this stark intuition. Studies in behavioral psychology show that people who receive social recognition for unfulfilled intentions have significantly lower completion rates than people who work quietly. Premature recognition satisfies the psychological need for achievement before the actual achievement occurs. It's like eating dessert before dinner. It kills the hunger that should motivate you to do the real work. Carter documented 23 successful operations during the final months of the war. None made headlines. None earned a Medal of Honor. None were publicly celebrated. But all saved lives, all shortened the war, all contributed to the ultimate victory in ways that could only be measured in the absence of death, not in the presence of glory. And he carried these quiet victories with far more pride than he ever carried the promotion medal that had led to the fatal mistake in that Dutch pub. The final lesson he learned was this: real building happens away from the spotlight. True greatness is cultivated in silence, protected from observers, nurtured through small, consistent actions that no one sees until they produce fruits impossible to ignore. And when you finally emerge with undeniable results, you no longer need recognition because you already have something infinitely more valuable: the brutal certainty that you are capable of executing even when no one is watching, applauding or validating. I closed my grandfather's letters with a brutal clarity that completely changed how I operate in the world. For 42 years of my life, I had been exactly like Lieutenant Carter before that Dutch pub, dependent on external validation, addicted to announcing grandiose plans, confusing propaganda with progress. I talked about every project I was going to start. I posted about every change I was going to make. And in the process of announcing, I wasted all the energy that should have been invested in silent execution. Lieutenant Henry Carter died in 2008 at the age of 90. At his funeral, 17 veterans showed up, all over 80 years old, all still alive because one officer had learned through devastating guilt that strategic silence saves more lives than loud eloquence. They didn't talk about the medals he didn't receive. They talked about the silent missions no one knew about the lives saved through discreet planning, about the man who proved that true greatness needs no audience. The last letter my grandfather wrote was 3 days before he died. His hands trembled, but his mind was crystal clear. I spent 90 years in this world. 18 months were enough to learn that words are commitments you cannot keep and vulnerabilities you should not expose. The rest of my life was spent applying this brutal lesson. Start so small that failure is invisible. Finish so big that success is undeniable. And between the beginning and the end, maintain absolute silence. Because men who talk about doing rarely do. Men who do in silence rarely need to speak. You've reached the end of this story, but you're silent. Transformation is about to begin, and now you have a choice. You can close this video and go back to the old pattern of announcing grandiose plans that never materialize. Or you can decide that today, right now, at this very moment, you stop talking and start executing in strategic silence. Don't abandon Lieutenant Carter in that Dutch field where 87 men died because of 5 unnecessary words. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us what project you will build in absolute silence. Help this channel bring more stories of soldiers who learned that silent execution speaks infinitely louder than noisy propaganda. Your greatness begins when you shut your mouth and pave the way through actions too small to be noticed until they become impossible to ignore. Lieutenant Carter killed 87 men with 5 words spoken out of vanity. He spent 18 months proving that strategic silence saves more lives than loud eloquence. He discovered that starting too small to fail publicly and ending too big to be ignored is the only way to build something real without the paralyzing prison of external expectations. What grand plan did you publicly announce but never execute because you wasted all your energy on advertising?